Welcome back to the channel, guys. Today we are starting off in my son's bedroom just so we can showcase the item that we built, which is a growth chart, or one of the giant rulers that people use to measure their sons and daughters' growth over time. So we're going to try to do our son once a year on his birthday, daughter once a year on her birthday. Our son's not quite 2 yet, and our daughter is only about 4 months old, so it'll be a while before we start putting her on it. And I just wanted to really showcase in the environment that we are hanging these items in, while we chose the colors we did. I felt like the brown set off his room pretty well. So here we are looking at the growth chart itself. The numbers and the name are three-dimensional letters we cut on the CNC machine. And then we engraved the lines and we engraved the weight and the birth date. So here is Zoe's sign, which we used a paint stain instead of just using a standard stain. You get it mixed at Home Depot. I thought it turned out pretty well. This is the color we're going to do her furniture and future projects. So if you look at her room, she's got a dresser. It's low quality. One of the drawers in it already broke. It's just something we ordered off of Amazon. Same thing with the crib. The crib's working pretty well. So we're just going to build her furniture out of black walnut from her family's farm, or my wife's family's farm. So the parents had to cut down some black walnut trees, and we're going to take some of that wood and basically build from scratch. So jumping into the shop, we did pretty much most of this work came off the CNC machine. I've been trying to build up my CNC projects and get better at using this equipment. So we bought some select pine wood from Home Depot. It's already sanded, really smooth, really nice wood. Definitely still check it for bows. And whenever I carved this out, I made sure to check the grain pattern and made sure that the curvature would be facing towards the wall. Even though it shouldn't get much moisture or anything to make it warp. You know, wood likes to do funny things on its own as it dries out over time. So another key trick that I use on my spool board, and this is just a standard Avid CNC spool board file. You've got the clamp holes that you'll see me putting the clamps through, but there's also little dowel holes that are spaced, I want to say 2 inches apart, and it fits 1/4 inch router bits, which is great, right? Because that's usually what I'm putting in my machine is a 1/4 inch bit. So I just take 2 router bits, stick it into the dowel holes, and then that's what I use to align the wood. I bought 4 pieces of this select pine. Like I said, $22 a board, so not a terrible deal considering how high prices are right now on everything. I cut all 4 with the ruler lines, but I left 2 of them unpainted, unengraved, just so if anybody orders off of my shop or anything else, I can go ahead and have 2 of them sitting there ready to go. You'll see me struggling here a little bit, getting the clamps in place. It's just hard for a bigger body dude like me to get up under there and get the clamps always in the right orientation, especially if it's towards the center of the board. And if you're cutting out 1/4 inch material, you'll definitely have to do a better job of clamping it down. So I've been looking at other options. I've seen some people use T-tracks with clamps. I've seen people just screw the board down, which I don't want to do because I'm trying to keep the full length of the material. And that's just kind of the process right now that I'm using, but I do plan to find a better way in the future. I really like the idea of the vacuum tables. So if you can afford vacuum tables, I would definitely recommend getting one if you're going to the CNC route, because it just speeds up the process overall, and you don't have to worry about material regardless of the size of it moving around. What I'm doing now is I'm taking measurements of the board. Something I've learned as a new woodworker, and you may not know, is not everything is dimensional lumber, right? Even though it says, like on this board we're about to show right here, this is supposed to be a 1 by 1 by 8 piece of pine, but as you can see, the 8 inches is actually like 7 1/4. And that's just the same across the board. Nothing is exactly dimensional. They're just giving you rough estimates of the cut. I'm sure other people will give you history on that. I don't know the history behind it. I just know, you know, when I first started this, I would go in, buy a board. I'm like, yeah, that's what I need. I need a 2 by 2 or 2 by 4, and nothing ever lines up perfectly like it's supposed to. So always measure what you need. If you're like me and you're new and you're trying to go off of precise measurements, it's really going to matter if you're buying construction grade lumber instead of milling your own or getting dimensional lumber. So now we've headed over to the laptop. We bought this specifically for the CNC machine. The requirements aren't really heavy, what you need as far as RAM and storage space, just, you know, based off your personal preference more than anything. I keep a lot of my storage files on Google Drive too, just because I know this laptop is getting abused a little bit being out in this dust. If you could put it in a clean environment, I just don't have one right now. I do plan to build an office down the road inside the shop where I can keep everything nice and clean and dust free. For now, I'll probably just have to rip the laptop apart and blow it out once in a while. So we're just plugging in the job dimensions and size of the board. That's why it's important to take the actual measurements, because your CNC is an accuracy based machine. And we're not going to go through the whole build out process, but once you figure it out, Vcarve's not that hard to use. I'll probably be selling the plans for these pretty soon on my web shop. Now you'll see me here struggling to undo the collet and release the bit from the spindle. This is the 2 wrenches that come with it. One is a specialty spanner wrench, and the other one is just a really thin piece of metal. Not an adjustable wrench, it's a fixed wrench, but an adjustable wrench would work there. And I'm just having issues, and I over tighten it, trying to loosen it because I couldn't tell which direction it needed to go in. I thought the bit itself was bound up. I bent their fixed wrench that came with it, and that wasn't the adjustable wrench sliding off. That was me finally breaking it loose, and then it just slipped off after that. So I didn't mess anything up. Tighten it all back down. One thing I will point out too, well, right here we're going to show you the wrench and how I kind of bent it, so it's useless now. So I'll have to just buy another adjustable wrench to keep next to the table. We're using the Auto Touch Z plate. This way it'll measure exactly from the corner that you select within the software. It gives the machine a bunch of the dialed in accurate information, so you don't have to know exactly where it sits on the board. If you guys buy this machine, 100% recommend it. It saves you a lot of issues and trouble. So now we'll go into showing you the engraving and showing you the cutout of the ruler lines. I used a 1/4 inch roundover bit to cut out the individual ruler lines. That way it's got a nice round shape to it. I felt the paint would sit in it pretty well, and I feel like the look of it's pretty nice. The lines themselves are all offset by about a 1/2 inch. So the 6 inch, the 3 inch, and the 1 foot lines are all different sized. If you look at the engraving, I'm using a 90-degree Vcarve bit to cut out the engraved words. It worked pretty well. I was going to use a 60, but the 90 is what I decided to go with. So the bottom image is just a close-up of it. All in all, this process I think took less than 5 minutes for the CNC machine to cut it all out. Probably take a little bit longer on a harder material. Of course, we now have to run it over to the miter saw station. We're going to cut these boards to length. We left 1 inch of spacing between every single line. So from the very top line, we're going to take off 1 inch and leave that 1 inch gap at the top. That way it's all nice and evenly spaced. You will notice too at the bottom of the board, it's offset by 6 inches. You got to keep in mind that this is going to have to go above the baseboard, right? You can't put it directly on the ground. So whenever you do your measurements, just keep in mind you're not starting at the 0 mark at the bottom of the ruler. You're starting at the 6 inch mark at the bottom of the ruler. We also do some sanding, everybody's favorite, and I use my orbital sander to do most of it, just to knock down all the rough edges. And then I take a piece of sandpaper and by hand I go line by line just to make sure I knock out all the furs of wood. Wasn't a lot, but there were enough that I just wanted to make sure I got in there before we painted it to make it all nice and smooth. You can also just see how concentrated I am. I didn't realize how tired I was. Again, I do most of the stuff in the middle of the night, so I've been up since probably 5 a.m. It's probably 2, 3 o'clock in the morning when I'm doing this portion. So I just look tired and exhausted. Very mean look on my face if you guys look close. So pulling out more of the Lowe's material that we picked up, we got 2 cans of black spray paint, and then we got 2 cans of spray-on polyurethane that we're going to put over the tops of the boards. So we went ahead, we took the spray paint, we sprayed in the lines after we did the sanding. I don't know if I would use the Rust-Oleum spray paint again. I might go see if I can find a cheaper, lighter, thinner spray paint because it's just very difficult to sand it off. I did spend quite a lot of time with 40 grit sandpaper, then 80 grit sandpaper, then up to I think 120, sanding the growth charts back out, trying to get as much of the paint off as I could before I applied the stain. And then I went back in with my air compressor and a spray nozzle, and I just sprayed air to make sure I got as much dust out of the cracks and holes as I could. And then I went back with my hand and a towel and just wiped it down and then sprayed it off a second time. Again, just trying to make sure I get as much of the sawdust off of it as I possibly could and as much of the sanding dust off as I could. But I went through a lot of sheets of sandpaper to get that Rust-Oleum spray paint off. It just gunks up the sandpaper. It stops working as well. So maybe if there's a better option, if you guys could just leave in the comments below. I'm trying to find faster processes for doing this so that I can batch out a bunch of these all at once. But this definitely took a lot longer than I thought it was going to, and I think it's because of the type of spray paint I used. So once we were done with the spray paint, it was time to stain. So we used the paint stain for hers, or Zoe's, and that's where that gray color comes from. That's what we're going to do with our furniture. Like I said, we're planning to make a 2 nightstands and a dresser as soon as we can get it dried out. We did buy a moisture meter just to sort of keep up with it. We went with our classic Jacobine brown stain that I like so much on pretty much all of my projects so far. It's just my personal favorite, and that's what we're using in my son's room. What I found is the stain, the Jacobine stain, you can just kind of brush it on lightly to try to keep it out of the lines. Even if it gets in the lines a little bit, it just darkens them up and makes it look like black paint. So probably could have avoided doing the spray paint on that. The issue we ran into on the gray, because it's a more of a paint consistency instead of a stain consistency, so a little bit less watery, it likes to run down into the cracks, and then the gray sits there, and the lines, instead of being black like we wanted them to be, get the gray in there. So I might have to go back with a painter's brush, like a artistic painter's brush, and redo the lines. So if there's a better paint that I can use over the top, I definitely, I'm all ears to hear what I should use. Just again, the time this takes is pretty long, but putting on his stain was extremely quick and easy. Just brush it on, go in the direction of the grain of the wood, and then you go back with a towel and pull it off as much of the excess as you can. Make sure you don't get any overly dark spots. We just did 1 coat of the Jacobine stain, and we just did 1 coat of the painted stain. Time to complete on this project from start to finish would probably be about 3 days. 1 day to go pick up the material, cut everything, get the CNC machine to cut it out, and that would only take maybe 1 to 2 hours at most once you get really efficient at it and know what you're doing. So not long at all, because you only have to do a couple of bit changes. The longest portion obviously is going to be the staining, just waiting for it to dry. Staining itself is pretty quick, and the poly spray, because you want to let both of those sit up 24 hours for the final cure. So once we got done with the stain, got everything wiped up and cleaned up, we let it sit here for a day. Then we came back and took it into the garage just because it's really cold outside. I wanted to take it somewhere where it's a little bit warmer, and that's where we did the spray on poly. This is probably one of my favorite parts of the entire process, where you come in, you wipe off the excess stain. I really feel like that Jacobine just makes this wood look a lot richer. It's just standard pine. You start seeing all the grain patterns come out. Everything starts to look a little bit glossy, but until you put that final coat of poly or urethane on there, you're not going to see the full gloss come out. But just wiping that black off and seeing just, how gorgeous the wood can be underneath, always a great way to finish the day or finish the night. You feel like you're really making some progress at that point. So like I said, we cut the numbers and the letters out on the CNC machine. That was some trial and error. I started with 3/4 inch material, realized that was too thick. It looked way too blocky. So I went back and used 1/4 inch material that I had laying around, and that turned out pretty well. It seemed to be the right height off the board. I was just trying to showcase the different things we could do with the CNC machine. Then I took an adjustable square, spaced everything out at the exact same, realized that some of the lettering, even though it was the same font style, I couldn't just space it out, so I had to eyeball some of it. I think it turned out pretty well. We did do a Facebook poll on my wife's Facebook just to get a bunch of moms' opinions on what they like, since typically that's the crowd that's going to be going after these growth rulers more than some of us stoic dads. I like the idea, we all do, but typically it's the moms that really put thought into planning out their kids' entire life, and we appreciate it. We just don't put that thought in half the time, I feel like. So this definitely came from me when I was looking for woodworking projects, and then I got her input on how she wanted the names put and spaced out, and she couldn't make up her mind on some of it, so we decided to do the Facebook poll, and this is what they came back with on how they wanted to do the lettering and the spacing. One thing I will probably do is I plan to shorten the lines up maybe a 1/2 inch, 1/4 inch, just to give us more spacing for the name, make everything look a little bit more balanced, because right now I've got the foot lines coming directly to the center of the board. Everybody wanted the numbers on the end of the line instead of above the line, and that's what we went with. And then I'm just gluing them on there with wood glue. I'm wondering if I should have used a different type of glue, maybe a spray adhesive. If you guys have any recommendations on that, let me know, because it just took a while to get the wood glue on there, and trying to clean it up, all the squeeze out, was a pretty painful process. And we just spray painted the lettering too once we got it all cut out and cleaned up. Used a 1/4 inch downcut bit to cut out all the letters on the CNC. The other thing I would change is the engraving. I put it right under a foot line mark, the 2 foot line. I would take that and I would lower it down to the 6 inch mark, just to give it more space, balance the board out better. But it was still good enough for now. It just didn't let me, I wanted to make the numbers a little bit bigger. If you guys like this project, if you could, just leave a comment below, like, subscribe, and give me any ideas for any future products.